CEO and founder of CEO Bootcamp. He's a serial entrepreneur, a guy who's been in the space for a long time, and is going to share with us his expertise. I want to get into his first business venture, how he built that up, and then also talk a little bit about today, because John, from some of the things that you were telling me on the phone the other day, reminded me of a lot of the current members in our program. So I'll leave it here, John. How would you say, what was your first foray into business?
Oh, my first foray was a total disaster. Two buddies of mine and I wanted to open up a waterbed store. So that's how old I am. Waterbeds were a thing. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know anything about retail. We just thought, oh, how hard can this be? We found out. It turns out what we should have done, the only person who made any money was the manager we hired. We should have just found some guy off the street and said, hi, here's a bunch of money, go away. But it got me the bug, kind of. And the next business I started, I actually started cleaning windows. And what I found about that one was it's a low barrier to entry. So anybody's good can start their own window cleaning company. And I had some guys working for me. Some of them were really good. Some of them weren't. And I realized if this keeps going, I'm going to have 10 or 12 trucks on the road, and half of these guys are going to be showing up drunk and whatever. So I kept that going for a little while, but I pivoted. The most unusual business I had, we sold movie libraries to apartments, and they had like 50 movies. They rented them for the month. And they used it as a marketing tool. If you rent an apartment here, you can borrow the movies for free. And we were swapping the movies out every month. That was like Netflix before there was Netflix. Long story short, that business, obviously we saw the internet coming, and it slowed down, but it lasted way longer than it should have. But while it was happening, I was living in Texas at the time, and I wanted to live back in the Northeast where I'm from. But it didn't make sense to move the company. So I left the company there. And This was before it was really easy to do remote businesses. They would overnight me data tapes so I could see what was going on. And I ended up working myself not out of a job, but out of a day-to-day work. So I wasn't putting in that much effort. I was maybe working 20 hours a month at this thing, and it kept growing and it kept growing. And it gave me some time to do something else. Somebody who I used to work with called me up and said, you ought to look into this thing called coaching. You'd be great at it. And I said, what's that? I had never heard of a coach outside of sports. So I looked into it, got some training, started coaching other business owners with some of the things that I had done to get myself out of the day-to-day work. And I ended up with a group of people. We started the International Coach Federation, which is a professional service organization. I was their fourth president in the late 90s. And that thing has gone on to grow to about 50,000 members worldwide now. And I started in the late 90s coaching other business owners with some of the things that I was learning. And I kept learning even more from the clients that I work with. I worked with some really pretty amazing people, and it's just some incredible ways that people can make money. But what I've seen is that all businesses are structured in a very similar way. If you look at the 50,000 foot view, they all have to make something people want to buy. They all have to sell. They all have to build an organization to do those things over and over again at a profitable basis. So that involves hiring people, tracking the money, making sure people have information accessibility, and all that same stuff. And then it's how do you apply that to your specific situation? And that's the kind of stuff that I coach them around.
Okay, interesting. So I guess going back to that first company, like, would you say that, the issues that came up and made it a disaster, is that stuff that you foresaw? Or
no, did we plan to have a disaster? No. There were two things, the two basic things. One is this was when interest rates were going through the roof. And so interest rates, the month that we opened, interest rates actually slowed down furniture sales nationwide. So that was one thing we couldn't have foreseen. But the other part is we didn't know anything about retail. We thought you throw up a business, you put a sign up, you put some ads in the paper, and people will come. and we didn't know how to do that and how to price and how to advertise or any of that kind of stuff that you could learn. The other thing was there were three of us. We were friends. We didn't have any kind of partnership agreement, and so we would all discuss everything. And it would take us an hour to discuss something that one person could have decided in 5 minutes. So we didn't know anything about how partnerships ought to work and that kind of stuff. Um, so luckily, I didn't lose too much money. It didn't keep me out of the game, but um, yeah,
Fair enough.
that's
So how did you kind of so walk me through like your thinking and moving on to the next thing after that? A lot of people, network are like at a point where they basically have to decide whether to continue with their business as is or start to look for the next thing. So just walk me through kind of how you thought about that.
I always I had a different approach than many of the people I see today. Many of the people I see today look at business strictly from a financial point of view. Is this a good thing to invest my money in? Can I get an SBA loan and do it?
Sure.
I always looked at it like, is this going to be fun? Is this going to support my lifestyle? Is this going to give me the time that I need to do to build a family and to do the things that I wanted to do? And so it was really structured around that. What I didn't know when I was younger was that the thing that would excite me was learning how businesses worked, learning about the business model, learning about how the different parts fit together. And as I would figure that out, then there's a level at which managing a company is routine. It can be repetitive. And that kind of bored me. So I would either sell the company or put somebody else in charge or get something else going on uh, as a side gig or something like that. And it took me a while to learn about myself that I loved the business model aspect of it and learning about that. And really, that's what I love about coaching is I can learn about so many different kinds of businesses, and then I
Right.
can
Without having to
teach.
be.
Yeah, and then I can teach the things that I've learned to people who haven't learned them. So that's what's fun for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's sort of the same way I sort of think about my clients. It's like you just need that maximum stimulation, but you wouldn't if you're not interacting with other businesses, you don't get in their heads. Like you don't really know what's going on. So with coaching, it's kind of like you can figure out and just learn more about business through the clients, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, cool. So walk me through your philosophy. I always tell people about hiring people. You talked about some of the things before. Where do you think that's at in this day and
Yeah,
age?
hiring. Well, if you ask a room full of business owners, what's the most frustrating thing about running your business? Most of them will say employees.
Right.
And,
Right.
I had that situation. My clients have had that situation. And what I've come to learn is a lot of that frustration comes from a disconnect between what you expect people to do and what they do. And if you take it a
Okay.
step further, well, if that's the most frustrating thing, why does anybody hire anybody? And there is a reason. The reason that you hire them is that you hire them to produce some kind of output, which
Mm,
you think you're hiring them to do the work, but it's slightly different focus. You're hiring them to produce the results of the work. It's like if you get in your car to go to the grocery store, you're not getting in your car to drive, you're getting in your car to be at the grocery store. That's the result. What I've found with many business owners is we have assumptions about what those outputs should look like,
okay.
and we don't express those things in enough detail. And one of the reasons is because entrepreneurs tend to be very intuitive and not very process oriented. So
Sure.
they'll just say, "Here, go ahead and figure this out," and expect somebody else to do it their way. The other reason is we don't want to be seen as a micromanager.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if something needs to be done a certain way because that affects the customers, it's not micromanaging to tell somebody that.
Right.
Now, if it doesn't need to be done that way, then don't tell them. Just tell them what needs to happen, but explain it in detail. I'll give you an example. Sometimes you'll say to somebody, can you handle this thing for me? And so
Sure.
you have in your mind what this thing should look like, but you didn't
They
quite
don't know.
say it. You know,
Yeah.
so maybe you say, "We have a competitor just popped up. Would you do some research into who they are?" Great. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean spend 10 minutes on Google and let me know? Does that mean hire McKinsey to do a secret shopper thing for $250,000? There's a whole lot of difference in there. But you have this thing in your mind and you may not have communicated properly. The second part of that is you also have in your mind some idea of when it should be done. Do you mean drop everything and do it this afternoon? Do you mean by next week would be fine? But you didn't say that. And if you don't say that, then it starts to bug you. I haven't heard from them in a couple of days. I wonder if that's happening.
Right.
They didn't, and I don't want to bug them.
Follow up. Yeah.
I don't want to bug them and follow up. So that's just a way to learn how to delegate. And the way to learn how to delegate is to be very clear about what the outputs are supposed to look like and be very clear about when you're going to follow up and say to them, look, this needs to be done by Friday. I'll check with you tomorrow morning just to make sure you're on track, which really means to make sure that I explained it well. And then I'll check with you on Wednesday to see if you're about halfway done. Yeah. And that way they're not surprised by you popping in. They're ready for you, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, see, it's interesting because that's, I work with a coach on this type of stuff. And so I try to do systems around it. The issue that I have is not myself managing people and being reasonable at tasks or task follow-up. It's explaining to them how to do that to their underlings.
Right.
Which they to teach them leadership, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I haven't found a way to sort of explain that.
So here's what I say to them. So this is the essence of the book that I wrote about this, called Output Thinking, which says the reason you hire people is to produce an output. And if you can't describe that output, then they are not likely to do a good job. And there's a children's fairy tale called The Shoemaker and the Elves. So the shoemaker is down to his last piece of leather, and he cuts it out. He's going to make shoes. He lays it out on the desk. He's going to make the shoes in the morning. Goes to sleep. These elves come in, and they put the shoes together. And it turns out they put shoes together so well, he can make twice as much money, and he turns his whole business around. But the elves leave before he wakes up. He wakes up in the morning, looks at his table. There was pieces of leather there. Now there's fully formed shoes. He goes, oh, the elves have been here. Well, how did he know? Yeah. What did he see? He saw those shoes. So what I say to people, and you could say this to your management, if your people came in the middle of the night, if they were elves and they did a great job, what would you see that indicated they were there and they did a good job? And what would you see if they did a great job that's different than if they just did a good job? And if you can explain it in those terms, what you would see, the behaviors that you'd see, the actions that you'd see, the results that you'd see, it makes it much easier for them to do a good job. And I was actually talking with a client earlier today. There was a new client that they'd hired who was doing sales support. And they said their 2-month review is coming up. And I said, are they going to be surprised by their review? And he said, oh, no, we've got exactly laid out what they should do, how they should be performing. If your performance reviews are a surprise, often that means you didn't explain exactly what you want them to do properly. Now, if you did all that and they still didn't do it, then the next question is, okay, what do you need to do a better job? Do you need training? Do you need tools? Do you need something else? And if they can't do a good job or won't do a good job, then that's easy to figure out.
Sure. Okay. What about just hiring people in general? Do you have a personality system? We have this one guy who was a coach, but he created basically a personality assessment system. How big of a factor would you say that stuff plays in someone's performance?
I have not used those personality things. I do have some clients who use it. The one that a lot of people like is called the Culture Index, which tries to fit people's culture to what the culture of the particular job needs. And I do think you should pay attention to people's personality traits, because let's just take the fact that some people are very detail-minded and they're very routine and they like to do the same thing over and over again. Other people are creative and they tend to have a big picture view and they tend to invent new ways of doing it. I don't necessarily want my bookkeeper to be creative. You know, I want them
Yeah,
to be detail minded
yeah,
and focused. Uh, but on the other hand, I want my marketing people and graphic artist people to be creative and not necessarily just do exactly the routine. So the personality has to fit with the job.
sure.
So that's my
What
answer to
about
that.
what about like whether how smart they are?
So try to phrase it in terms of behaviors that you would see. So
So okay,
smart
so
generally means they learn quickly.
right,
And there's a lot of jobs where it's very important to learn quickly because there's new things coming all the time. There's other jobs where it really doesn't matter. You could learn a little bit slowly. You're not going to be hit with a lot of different things. And
sure.
so that's a person who's perfect for that kind of job.
I get it. Yeah, the what I was kind of curious about is like I found that there's like certain tasks that are I don't know cognitively like they're taxing for people to do, like to like search for something or make a decision very quickly that are not like learnable skills. Do you know what I'm saying? It's more of
Yeah,
like just a
yeah.
core competency. Uh,
Those are two very different things. So the
right.
ability to search and to ask the right questions and to figure out how to dig deeper on something, that's a very different skill set than how to make decisions quickly.
Yeah.
And particularly as entrepreneurs, we often have to make decisions not only quickly but with very limited information. And
Nice.
so we have to do that. But yeah, those are skills that you can test for if you know this is the kind of person who we need in this particular job.
Yeah. So I guess leading on from that, we talked about this the other day. Entrepreneurs are generally speaking pretty stubborn and sort of resistant to change. So, like as a coach, how do you kind of get them to actually change their opinions or behaviors on certain things?
People are happy to change if it gets them the right results. If I said to somebody, I can give you twice as much money for half as much work if you do this, would that change make you unhappy? They go, no, I'd
Right.
love that change. So it's really putting the change into a context that makes sense for them.
Yeah.
And so, there's a saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And if you're happy with that, don't change, you know. But if you're not
Exactly.
happy, then you got to do something different.
Right. Change. Yeah, yeah. Or do you find that it's like important that they kind of you understand their niche or their type of business model? Like how effective would you be as a coach to somebody who's in an industry that like you know nothing about, or just a
I've
type of
coached a
business?
lot of different industries that I don't know anything about, but what's similar is that business tends to work the same way. I think
Right,
if you had somebody who wasn't involved in business at all, they wouldn't know the right questions to ask or the right places to look
right.
as a coach.
What's the highest profile kind of? I don't know if you could talk about this, but is there any like high profile or sort of high level clientele that you've had where
Oh,
you saw, saying something interesting or change?
I've worked with companies that are doing 1 million, 2 million in revenue to one that's doing hundreds of millions in revenue. In that particular case, it was a real estate development company, and this was a CEO who'd been hired by a family office, been there a couple years, and he was really brought in to change the culture. He was a very fast-moving, hard-driving individual, and the company that he was in had been about 100 years old. Many of the people were, I don't want to say complacent because they weren't bad at what they do, but they weren't fast moving. And he was trying to change that. And that was his what the board hired him to do. So his mandate. And so we were talking about how do you change that kind of culture? And so we talk a lot about how do you build trust with the team? How do you take the frustrations that he was feeling? Because as you can imagine, somebody who's fast moving and quick, and they're with people who are used to like, well, let's talk about this again. Here's what I think we should do, but
Exactly.
let's make sure we talk about it some more. Man. And he's like, no, don't talk about it. Let's just do it, you know. And so
Yeah.
I was coaching him about how to communicate those things because when we are frustrated as business owners, oftentimes we hold back and we don't
Right.
want to piss people off. We don't want to be angry. Uh, but that doesn't mean we can't say what we think. And
Right.
we should say what we think, but do it in a way that's respectful, that builds the trust that we want to see. And so that's
Cool.
what I'm working with him on.
Cool. So what's the biggest challenge? I mean, you've already talked about this a little bit, but like, what's the biggest challenge that you faced, and how did you kind of bounce back or get back from it?
There's two things that I would say, looking back, I should have done differently. One is with the video business. As it started to take off, I was not aggressive enough with sales. The most I ever had was 3 salespeople. I
Mm,
probably should have had a few more and put a lot more money and effort into that, because it was really growing and I should have milked it. I was a little scared to invest, frankly. Um,
right.
the other thing
It's
that was,
understandable at that point, but
yeah,
you know,
but and it worked out well. I mean, I'm not at all unhappy with the results, but I could have done more.
yeah.
The other thing that kind of hit me in the face one day was the realization that not everybody is like me. Shocker, I know. Uh, but
Right.
here's what happened: was this was at the time when printing technology was moving into more hard drive that were running printers. So we had this uh, printer, Xerox machine, collator, all this thing. It was about $2,000, and it was time to get a new one. And my guys were doing some research on how to get the best deal. And I said, technology is moving. Um, they were really good at getting the best price, actually. And I said, if you can find a way to do more with this new technology, I'd be happy to pay more. And that whole concept of how do you utilize technology to do different things, it was just foreign to them. These were
Yeah.
not technical people. And and that frustrated the hell out of me. And then it occurred to me, and actually my wife was the one that said, that's just not what these guys are good at. Why don't you just appreciate what they are good at
Mm,
and use them to do what they're good at? And the other visionary part of technology, that's what you're good at, so do that. And that kind of really opened my eyes to being a better manager, of understanding where people are strong, how to put them in the right position so that they can be strong, utilize what I now call your superpower, something you're good at, you love, and makes a difference, and not expecting everybody to have the same superpower. That was an eye opener for me.
yeah. Um, what people do you sort of follow in the space? Obviously, you've written books, but is there anybody who you follow or sort of take advice from in the space?
um, I just I don't know that I follow people as much as I try to learn from them, but each person that I
Sure.
read or listen to a podcast about, there's usually one or two nuggets that I can learn from. One of the things I have found, and your listeners will have to pay attention to this because I'm telling my own story, is that when people tell their own story, they often forget about some of it has to do with luck. Some of it has to do with being at the right place at the right time. It's not all, oh, I'm so wonderful, I did all this stuff
Oh
myself.
yeah. A
Um,
big percentage of it is luck.
yeah, but it's also knowing how to capitalize on that luck and how to
Right.
take advantage of that luck. So that's the
Exactly.
kind of thing I look at. And I try to look at the context within which somebody was successful.
Got it. Okay, so what's kind of walk me through like your goals for your current business? What are you trying to accomplish? Like, what's the ultimate objective?
Yeah, you're really kind to call it a business. It's really more of a practice right now. It's a coaching practice.
Right, right.
Um, and my real goals are, I have had a long, varied career as an entrepreneur. I've literally never had a job. Um,
Right. You may
and,
tell me
and
that, and I'm like, I'm the same.
yeah, and I'm what my line is. I'm mostly retired, but I don't have a boat, so I keep doing this coaching thing because I have a blast at it. So I'm trying to keep
Yeah.
working with people that I enjoy working with. I'm trying to keep enough of my practice open so that if somebody needs to talk to me more frequently, I don't charge by the hour. At the end of every coaching session, we say, what are your action items from today? And based on that, when should we talk next? Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 3 or 4 days, it's whatever. And my wife and I like to travel a lot. So I'm at the retirement stage of my life, but I don't have a boat, so I keep doing this. So
Yeah.
that's really my goal. Excuse me. That's really
Yeah.
my goal, is to find more and more people that I enjoy working with.
Cool. What how can people get in touch with you? Where can you be found?
The easiest place to find me is my website, ceobootcamp.com. They can email me. There's a link there to have a free coaching session. They
Sweet.
can buy a copy of my book, Output Thinking. And if they have a question or comment, I'm happy to talk.
Awesome. And in terms of like like size of business or stage, like who do you think is who from our network would you most be able to help, you think?
I typically work with people who have from 10 to 100 employees. If they get into thousands of employees, they probably figured out anything I could help them with. If they're under 10, they probably don't have the resources to really make a lot of changes at the moment. So it's somewhere in there, which typically becomes like 2 to 20 million in revenue. Although I think the complexity of the organization, the number of people, and the number of managers is a more important dynamic than just revenue, because a $5 million
Right.
software company is very different than a $5 million restaurant.
Yeah.
And I've worked with all kinds of different industries.
Cool. Sounds good, guys. We'll drop all the links in the chat. John, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate that convo.
Well, thanks
And
for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a joy.
great.